As much of the world was plunged into financial disaster, President Hoover did little to address the clear warnings that the economic pillars of the nation were about to collapse. Reasoning that the private sector would correct the economy naturally, Hoover maintained his stance and refused to strengthen the reach of the central government. When the Great Depression swept through the nation, Hoover called for the Hooley-Smoot tariff, despite warnings from nearly 24 economists that it would only make matters even worse. Because of the tariff, the United States effectively alienated many of their trading partners, which crippled both farming and industry. As banks closed, people lost their jobs and homes went into foreclosure, and overwhelming hopelessness consumed the American psyche. In 1932, the election between Franklin Roosevelt and Herbert Hoover was one of much debate. Many feared the ambition of Roosevelt, but the profound failure of Hoover allowed FDR to easily claim victory. Roosevelt promised a new deal for the American people, one where the man forgotten at the bottom of the social pyramid would finally be called on. Implementing his 3 R's, recovery, reform, and relief, Roosevelt began passing legislation and establishing programs rapidly. To re-establish Americans' faith in the banking system, banks across the country were promptly closed and examined for corruption. With the passing of the Emergency Banking Act, stable banks reopened, while unstable ones dissolved. During one of his famed fireside chats, time in which Roosevelt spoke to the American people over the radio, FDR implored them to put their money back into the banks. The SEC, or the Security Exchange Commission, helped to regulate the stock market and monitor insider trading. Going further, many other programs also showcased the power of the government. The AAA, or the Agricultural Adjustment Act, provided farmers with government subsidies. Farmers were instructed to produce less crops in a bid to inflate the prices of their produce. The 4 most popular commodities were cotton, wheat, corn, and hogs. Other important programs focused on providing temporary employment for American men. The CWA, or the Civil Works Administration, provided construction jobs such as paving roads and building bridges. Although these jobs were temporary, they offered thousands of men steady pay, and it helped to repair much of the nation's physical infrastructure. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, established 1,500 camps throughout the country. Young men between the ages of 18 and 25 did work outdoors, restoring parks and working on construction. They were paid well, and they ate for free. After completing their residencies, many of them even wanted to return to their posts. The PWA, or the Public Works Administration, comprised of men working on sewers and waterways. This was so successful that 99% of American counties had at least one PWA system. There are many, many more programs that FDR helped to create in the New Deal, but as you can see, compared to his predecessors, FDR's administration was extremely radical in its work on the domestic front. Although these programs helped many Americans, there were clearly both critics on the right and on the left. Conservatives argued that the government was gaining far too much power and all of the restrictions would cripple business, while many radical liberals claimed that FDR was not going far enough. Despite his efforts, the New Deal ultimately did little to actually revive the American economy. It did provide relief to millions of Americans, but it was the U.S.'s engagement in World War II that actually stimulated the financial landscape of the country. With most other countries in financial ruin, with all resources dedicated to fighting Nazi Germany, the United States was left as the only great power able to trade coveted materials. Likewise, when Americans got involved, industries exploded as appliances and other materials were in high demand during the war effort. The development of business during this time allowed many industries to continue to flourish even after the war had ended. Although the New Deal was not successful in turning the American economy around, it did provide badly needed temporary relief, and more importantly, it facilitated a shift in the American government's role in its citizens' lives. The New Deal coalition, Democratic presidents in power from the early 1930s until the late 1960s, served as a clear contrast to the line of Republican presidents that came before. Conclusively, FDR's time as president began with a nation at potentially its bleakest moment in history, and ended with the nation on a path to being the most prosperous it has ever been.